This one is different, very different. This new Georgia indictment is different from the other 3 indictments for one very significant reason. You, yes, you, will be able to watch it. You don't have to fly to Fulton County and stand in line at 4 a.m. hoping to get the very few public seats. Instead, you will watch it on your TV screen. You're going to see the former president and the 18 others who have been indicted with him from their very first day in court, from the moment they are arraigned and utter those words, not guilty, that every defendant does in every indictment. And the cameras, they're not going to stop there. You will get to watch the entire trial and even the return of verdicts, whatever they may be. Transparency. This is a full throttle example of the right to the public trial embodied in the 6th Amendment to the Constitution. Am I positive it will be televised? Well, Georgia law, unlike the federal law, permits it. And indeed, it is true that the trial court judge in Georgia could pull the plug on cameras if the parties objected. But will the parties object? Well, you know Trump. Do you think he's likely to object, or will he want you there in the courtroom virtually watching? I think he will insist on cameras. But what about the other side, the other party, the prosecutor? Will the prosecutor object? Maybe. But the optics of closing the courtroom when prosecuting a former president of the United States when he wants the trial televised would not be good. One half of the country would be certainly crying foul, asking why the prosecution is hiding the trial from the people. That one half of the country already feels the cards are stacked and the case is rigged. Asking to turn off the cameras when Georgia law permits it would only fuel that distrust of the process that is already under siege in this country. So my guess, well, I certainly don't know all the evidence. I don't know what the verdicts will be, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I've been around long enough to say, get ready. You are about to see whether you like the former president and the co-defendants or not, whether you have mistrust of the prosecutor or not, you will see how the sausage is made in the courtroom, and it is not very pretty. It's raw. And for those of us old enough to remember, this trial may be more explosive, more polarized, and more widely watched than O.J. Simpson. Buckle up tight. This is the record. Well, here's a thumbnail sketch of the latest of the 97-page indictment in Georgia. The numbers: 19 defendants. That means at a bare minimum, 38 people, assuming only one lawyer per defendant, crowded at the defense table. Now, if each defendant wants 2 lawyers, do the math. And the judge might be thinking, or even leasing, the Atlanta Falcons Stadium. So who are the 19 defendants? Besides the obvious, former President Donald Trump, there are 18 others who make up the who's who of Trump's post-2020 election team. Many of them you will recognize, having seen them on TV after the 2020 election or from their illustrious careers, such as former New York City Mayor on 9/11, Rudy Giuliani, and Trump's former White House Chief of Staff and former Congressman Mark Meadows. And the indictment itself reads sort of like an index to the Georgia State Criminal Code. There are 41 total charges. President Trump is charged in 13 counts. Mayor Giuliani charged in 13 counts. Mark Meadows, just 1 count. And I'm going to tell you about it. It arises out of a call on January 2nd, 2021 to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And besides the other named and charged, there are 30 unindicted and unnamed co-conspirators. Now, what's an unindicted co-conspirator? That is someone who the grand jury claims took part in the conspiracy, but for reasons not given, were not indicted. The total number of alleged crimes is 41 counts, in the 41 counts is 161. Of course, very important to remind you, an indictment is just the prosecutor's version of what happened. The defense is not in the grand jury room, and the prosecutor's evidence before the grand jury is not cross-examined, meaning it's not been challenged. That happens when a trial occurs, when the first time both sides have an opportunity to present evidence, not just the prosecutor, and to challenge evidence. As for another number, this is notable. The Fulton County DA, Fani Willis, says she would seek a trial date in the next 6 months. Of course, she has to figure that one out with the judge and coordinate with the schedules of at least 19 defendants and 19 lawyers, not to mention trying to pick a time that does not conflict with trials in South Florida, New York City, and here in Washington, D.C. In sum, this is a scheduling nightmare at best. Former federal prosecutor and former assistant district attorney in Cobb County, Georgia, Francey Hakes joins me, a former U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, J-Town, joins me. Francey, first to you because you were a prosecutor down in Georgia, a neighboring county. is this really likely to be on camera, on television?
Way Fani Willis will object to cameras in the courtroom. She's a public official. She gets elected. She's constantly running for re-election, and I think she has her eye on higher office. And number three, the judge in the case, McAfee. Judge McAfee of the Superior Court was appointed by Governor Kemp just this year. I believe it was February of this year. So he has to run for election in 2024. So he's definitely going to want his face on TV, whether it's yelling at the judge, yelling at the defendant to get his name out there, or bending over backwards to be fair and impartial. We have no idea which, or maybe a little bit of both. I suspect he will also want cameras in the courtroom. And he can decide to have cameras in the courtroom even if one party objects. I've had that happen to me before here in Georgia, whereas the prosecutor, we said we were fine with cameras in the courtroom when the media applied and the defendant objected, and the elected Superior Court judge said, oh, I think I'll let them in. So it's likely to be televised.
Jay, I've tried a case with 12 defendants, and it was a nightmare, never 19. Even if there weren't the other three trials, the other three indictments, it's incredibly complex to do 19. How are they going to ever figure out a date that works for everybody, taking into account that you've got three other trials that come, at least in time, they've been indicted before you?
Well, I'll point this out. There is a RICO trial going on right now in Fulton County, and jury selection has been going on for 7 months. So they haven't even had opening statements yet. And this is two defendants, not 19, not the scheduling nightmare that you mentioned for 19 lawyers, plus a judge, plus all the other cases in Fulton County that still need to be prosecuted. This is not going to be something, I think, that we see tried in 2024 even, if it's tried at all. There are so many holes, and I know you want to talk about this, but there's so many holes in this indictment that it is likely to be sort of, a RICO case is like the movie Pulp Fiction. You pull out one piece of it and the story doesn't make sense anymore. A lot of these pieces are going to get yanked out.
All right, let me ask you about the indictment since you talk about it. It's almost 100 pages long, all these charges. I mean, and I say it looks like the index to the criminal code. Do you have any problem looking at the indictment with how it is set up? Because it's just basically a menu, a one-sided menu. You have any problem with it?
I do. I don't think any serious RICO prosecutor would have put in the predicate facts that Fani Willis did. There are, as you mentioned, there's 161 overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy here. Out of those, 92 of them occurred outside of Fulton County, and most of them are actually legal conduct, right? So having meetings with your lawyer, sending tweets, making phone calls, things like that, those are not against the law. That you might be wrong, you might be incorrect, but those in and of themselves, those predicated offenses don't really underlie the RICO conspiracy here. And so no serious prosecutor that knows anything about RICO would have laid out an indictment like this where almost all the conduct itself is legal.
All right, Francey, the unindicted co-conspirators, why is that written into this indictment? What's the point of that?
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes those are cooperating witnesses. Sometimes those are people that, for reasons we don't know, the prosecutor doesn't think they have enough evidence to actually include as part of the conspiracy. And speaking of RICO, just a little fun fact on Georgia legislative history, Greta. The legislature put in a statement in the RICO statute itself that listed their intention as to who this statute should target. And it listed very specifically only those people who are committing violent acts in an organized way, so gangs and the mob, and those who are gaining a pecuniary or financial gain in victimizing people. So that's things like pyramid schemes, think Bernie Madoff, or school teachers rigging tests for profit. Those are the kind of things that are designed to be targeted by the Georgia RICO statute, and I don't see a single count in there. And I'll notice there's only one racketeering count in this racketeering indictment.
Well, it's a pretty big indictment. It's a long way. Anyway, Francey and Jay, don't go away because I have much more to talk to you about later in the hour, so I'll come back to you.